What do you think is the definition of success of security engineer in startups? As long as you mentioned that.
If I can summarize this in one word, two words: iterable improvement. Improvement is are we better at doing something that we were doing yesterday? Where are we? This was my ideal state. What have I done to get one step closer to that ideal state? The short answer is yes. We're starting to too heavily depend on ChatGPT, Copilot, and Cursor, and all of these tools. In my talk at DEFCON, when I was talking about the tools giving you a false sense of security, I was able to demonstrate different examples where the tool, when I asked it to generate certain form of code, it was introducing vulnerabilities in the code.
Welcome to the season 3 of The Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host and AppSec enthusiast and growth manager at Escape. Today, I'm joined by Kalyani Pawar, an application security engineer at Zipline and a seasoned AppSec expert with a deep commitment to the startup ecosystem. Beyond her day job, she actively advises startups and VCs on what actually matters in application security. Kalyani is also the co-host of the Application Security Weekly podcast and a speaker at top conferences like DEFCON, BSides SF, and RSA. She's been a driving force behind the scenes too, serving on reviewer boards for DEFCON, WiCyS, and several BSides chapters, helping shape high-impact security content for the community. In today's episode, we dive into her experience designing security programs from scratch across startups of all stages and ask the big question: can minimum viable security be the fix to all AI-fueled chaos in startups? We'll also explore how VCs impact security decisions, the role of internal security teams, and how to tackle the beast of security debt. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. And with that, get ready to hear Kalyani's opinions. Dive right in. Hi Kalyani, I'm super excited to have you on the Elephant and AppSec podcast. Well, thank you so much, finding the time and having a chat with me, as also a fellow podcaster in a sense, because I saw some of your appearances on I think the application security podcast, and yeah, it was great. I think you're very confident, on how you present yourself and in the topics you're talking about, and you're also a renowned speaker. So you talk at DEFCON. Where you actually presented, I think, the dual nature of ChatGPT and Copilot in secure development. And I think right now, within the past couple of years, a lot of people in tech especially can't even live without ChatGPT, especially in startups. I think so. It's very, on point. And as I remember, you addressed the critical, limitations of the AI and AI-based tools in application security. How they lack kind of updated threat knowledge, because it's very hard, even for us as humans to keep with everything up to date. Like you have security researchers for that, but then AppSec, that's well, newsletters help sometimes, but it's not that great. And for AI, it's even you need to train the model on all the new threats that come out. So it's super interesting topic, and especially in the startups. Like I now see that, at least personally, I work in a startup. I use AI daily. Sometimes not specifically ChatGPT, but in any product that I use to speed up the process to actually ship things fast. And developers are the same to ship things fast, and sometimes they break things. They use AI, so it sounds promising to make everything more fast and more efficient, but I think sometimes even I'm afraid, do I lean too heavily on help to just ship things fast, or actually, and then I don't maybe understand something, and developers the same, something in depth, like all the concepts in depth, and especially like threats that new come out. Do you think like we're starting to lean a bit too heavy on AI and become a little bit more and more dependent on it?
The short answer is yes. We're starting to too heavily depend on ChatGPT, Copilot, and Cursor, and all of these tools. In my talk at DEFCON, when I was talking about the tools giving you a false sense of security, I was able to demonstrate different examples where the tool, when I asked it to generate certain form of code, it was introducing vulnerabilities in the code. And so I think that itself is a very insecure part. Like if I'm generating, a developer is generating, say, critical code around, say, authentication or something like that, you would want it to be 100% secure, right? So if you're developing too heavily on AI, you're bound to like introduce some of the errors on that end. Another problem is obviously there's like ever evolving, changing like this threat landscape. We're in 2025 and we're seeing all of these complex attack vectors day in, day out. As a human, it's just hard to keep up with it too. And
Well,
so
it's almost impossible.
it's almost impossible to keep up with it. And say ChatGPT would give me a good summary of what a vulnerability is. Say if I mentioned there's a critical 0 day in this product and so the CVE about it, it will give me a good summary of it, but maybe not that much of a contextually relevant explanation of how this is applicable to me. So there's another aspect of being contextually unaware. It's obviously it's introducing vulnerabilities, the threat landscape is changing, but now it's also contextually unaware, right?
Yeah.
It's like, even if you, like in my experience, I've tried to work with like Copilot a bunch of times, and I feel like it's sometimes, even if I give it the entire code base, it's not doing that great contextually. It's lacking that contextualization. And then the output is similar, right? It's not that great. But say, that's why I feel like the human element remains crucial. Even if we're depending heavily on AI tools. Like I would treat these AI tools, ChatGPT, like some assistant, like a junior AppSec engineer who just maybe started out yesterday. Yesterday is an overstatement. But
Well, yesterday, I think we have a problem.
but yeah, and there's, because you're contextually aware, you can tell what is the threat to your product at a given time. So it could depend on what kind of industry you work in, right? If you're in healthcare, or your concern is I don't want to leak PHI,
Yeah.
but is ChatGPT contextually aware about that? If you give it that prompt, then
Yeah, that's the question I had. Like,
exactly.
would the prompting, for example, like a very advanced prompting, would it help to make ChatGPT more contextually aware, or maybe create it like right now you can create GPT bots. So if you say you're, say, experienced security researcher and you work for, let's say, healthcare company, and explain what the application does, did you see actually the impact of it being more efficient?
It felt more textbook than practical. It feels more the prompt, like I might prompt and I might be able to direct it in a certain direction, but it feels more theory. Like if I talk about APIs, we'll talk about rate limiting and throttling. But I think that's any security engineer that's like basic. Like what more are you gonna give like your AI? What more are you gonna give me other than just like these basic textbook answers? That my experience. With extreme prompting, I still feel like it is lacking that thoroughness, that attention to detail. So it's more of an assistant than an experienced AppSec individual.
And what do you think, for example, in startups, as I mentioned in the beginning, you have that pressure to ship everything super fast. So that's where we rely on AI. So what's the solution then if it's like an assistant, but let's say you have your head of engineering that tells you, okay, finish it to me within 2 days, and someone doesn't know how to do it. How do you make sure that they actually ship something secure and not something that would, let's say, break, be broken?
Right. Okay. So I mean, if it's something that is like a low level feature, for example, I don't care if the button is red or blue. That's not a security concern. That's
Yeah.
okay. Use ChatGPT as much as you want to use. Like make as many beautiful buttons as you want to. We're talking about like, say, an encryption service. I would want to be a part of this. Like it's great if you're using ChatGPT to build it, but I want to be a part of this early on, like when we're in the requirement space itself. I would love to know that we have this project and this is what we're planning to do. Threat modeling since the beginning will help me understand what this feature is and how we're supposed to build it. Sure, you can use ChatGPT maybe like once you want to like gather an idea of how to build this feature out, but to have a human in loop absolutely is essential. Like, sure, it's 2 days short. And like I have been in situations where we're very close to going live, and then there are like these issues which feel like this has to be fixed before it goes live. The beautiful thing about startups is that there's a lot of autonomy in startups. So versus like in big tech, where in my experience in big tech, I used to if I find something that's vulnerable, I used to have to go file a ticket for the PM of the team. And then the PM of the team would file a ticket for the developers of the team. And then there would be a whole sprint planning. And then they would decide when to fix it, right? Versus in a startup, there's more autonomy, there's more freedom to like fix things. And so even if it is very close to like say the deadline, I had the liberty to go and make a few changes myself in the code itself. So I mean, I don't think ChatGPT can point that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like my long and short of the answer.
Okay. And for example, like a lot of engineering teams in startups, again, they hire interns to reduce costs. And well, as you mentioned, you have to actually have this awareness, to think, okay, so this is something low risk feature like a button where you have to update color, and this is something that actually can introduce risk. And when you're just starting, you don't have that experience, you don't have this reflexes to think, okay, this is something I might need to ask, my manager or security engineer, if there is one on the team, whether or not like to think about how can I approach it to incorporate, security into building the code and not to leak, sensitive data via an API. How would you recommend to someone who has, let's say, interns on a team or maybe some even interns listening to start thinking critically or actually manage the person?
Okay. So I feel like there is a shift in culture when it comes to like hiring an intern, right? Earlier, I guess like maybe a couple of years ago, it was easy to just hire an intern and then get done with it. But now I see the culture more towards like, are we ready to train an intern? Because if an intern is joining your team, they want to seek some value out of it, right?
Yeah.
They just want to join for like, I don't know, minimal paycheck.
Yeah.
But like they want to learn something out of it, right? Unless they like absolutely love it and like enjoy it for free. There are those nerds and people with that, spirit out there for sure. But if I am trying to hire an intern, I would see what value am I adding to their resume and what value will they be adding. Do I have the bandwidth to support that amount of training, right? At a startup, you're already racing with timelines because there has to be like faster shipping. And so I think first thing for anybody who's hiring an intern, even the question would be, do I have the bandwidth to hire an intern, train them? It's not easy to train a human being on a completely new surface, on a completely new product, right? So do I have the bandwidth to do this? And second is, what problem am I trying to solve here? It could be, is it like a very low hanging fruit? Like, for example, some of the best intern projects I've seen is like, finding all the secrets in your repositories and finding like clean all of those secrets, or finding ways to like stop secrets from being pushed, and more autonomy and control over bypassing the push protection and all of those fundamentals. If that is the kind of project you're trying to solve, go ahead, hire an intern. And this is the same thing I would tell an intern, like ask questions of what you're going to seek in your project. Like, what are you going to do? My intern project was finding a lot of vulnerabilities in a popular product that Intuit made back then. And I was able to find like 9 exact same codes, like exact same line of code.
Copy pasting at its best, yeah.
It was just like the function kept getting copied, pasted in different parts of the code base. But I was like, hey, but like the initial itself is wrong. So like everything else that you build is also wrong. And so the value that I sought out of it was I was able to do manual source code reviews. It's a skill that takes quite some time to learn. But I also had like a team of like 7 or 8 people to help me understand what the right roadmap is, right? It's like finding, you need some kind of mentorship as an intern, right? It's a new day at a new job and you want to be successful at it, but like, what is the definition of success? I think you have to start defining that on day one of your internship. And even before you start an internship, is this project appealing enough to me? Is this something I want to do long-term in my career? So I think it's a conversation on both the sides, the hiring manager and the intern.
And what do you think is the definition of success of security engineer in startups? As long as you mentioned that.
I will, if I can summarize this in one word, I will just say iterable. 2 words, iterable improvement. When I say that, well, let's dissect this into 2 different ways. Improvement is, are we better at doing something that we were doing yesterday? Where are we? This was my ideal state. What have I done to get one step closer to that ideal state? Say your ideal state is having 0 vulnerabilities across your code base. Well, I mean, it's a dream, but let's say that's your ideal state. Today, if I don't have, say, a SAST, or if I don't have a linter, what is one step that I can do to get myself closer to that ideal state? So that's improvement. When I say iterable, because we're so short on resources, right? We always have resource constraints.
Yeah.
How can I do this repetitively in such a way that it becomes a part of the process? It becomes a part of the culture. I've been like toying with this idea of culture as code, where you try to build things within the code that will improve the culture towards security, right? Things could be when you're making pushes which are related to security features, sure you answer all of those security related questions that you have set out by your AppSec engineer. Or there's like, you want to see that this one template can be repeated in multiple ways. And iterable in such a way that it makes your developers more independent in the longer term than just like having like short-term wins, right? So iterable improvement, I guess that's how I would like to think about this. Like that is what success would be at a startup. And now you can sit and decide what your metrics could be. Maybe your metric could be like, I was able to improve these critical applications that my company builds, or I was able to add more security services to defend a product. Now that is your definition of what your project is and how well you're doing every few iterations. That will be the metric of, well, today my coverage is like maybe 10%. Tomorrow is it 30%? Now that is a metric, right? That is a sign of improvement. So yeah, I would say having something that is repeatable and leading you to a positive direction is what would be success at a startup.
Do you think that building that security culture from the start is something that would help potentially avoid the security debt in the future? Because in a startup, because we ship fast, it's technical debt is quite common. So security debt, it's even worse. Unless you work at a security startup, it's even worse. So when you arrive there, at least something like you mentioned, like a checklist or incorporating security questions, at each deployment, is it a way to avoid the security debt?
Okay, so there's no way to avoid security. Let's get that straight.
That's
Yeah, there will always be like high impact, low effort tasks, and there will
okay.
always be high effort, low impact tasks. And you will obviously be leaning towards the upper one because you
Yeah.
want impact, right? You're a
Yeah.
new security team. You want to show that we are useful to this product. We are absolutely needed in this space. So you want to find those projects, right? But how would you deal with security debt, right? There's like so much security debt is also technical debt, right? How would you go about dealing with it? Say you have joined a full-fledged product today. It's like way past its MVP stage and you're like the first proper AppSec hire. What would you think of? I think there's like there has to be a strategy in place. For example, you start with a comprehensive security audit of it. Understand what exactly is this product and what service is critical, what is not critical. I also like to say this, that threat model is free. So you use it, you leverage it, and
Well, time is not free to actually cut it down.
Sure, time is not free, but like, how do you go about something where there's like nothing to build off of, like just a complete product, and then how are you gonna secure it, right? And so I think modeling is a very good strategy to like assess different risks that your product poses right now, different risks that are posed to it, and then you understand what is very critical, what can give me most business loss, what has really safety critical information sitting on it, and then you start prioritizing accordingly. So have a rough roadmap, a rough plan in your head about how to do this. Then you start defining what your ideal state is, right? Like when I like to put this as, when can I go to sleep comfortably and not think about work? That is
When you work at startups, as my own experience, you can't. Christmas holidays is exception, maybe at least for me. But
I think you need to define what that is at a startup, right? Like if I was a fintech company and if I knew that my, like some of the databases that I have like have only like maybe like a very password, like a username password, and I can see all of the financial data in the database, that would not give me sleep. But like if I knew that this database lies behind like multiple gates, and then it's very difficult to like, find whatever the content of is. Okay, and now I can sleep. I know there are like vulnerabilities in the database. Like maybe it's like, I don't know, maybe it's like not the most updated version of SQL or something like that. That could be, but like it's not like putting me off of sleep. when I know that there is certain gates in place, right? So define what your ideal state is and then start working backwards from it, right? Once you have that ideal state, like where we are now, where we want to go, and what do we have to do to get there? Then assess resources to it. You can then allocate what your resources could look like, what your budget could look like at that point, and then you can start working towards that plan. Now, while you're also doing that whole audit, which is like working backwards, you also want to work forward, meaning you want to balance security and development at the same time, right? Don't want to add checks in a place which slow down your development teams, right? So find processes which can easily be integrated in such a way that they do not compromise on velocity. I think these are like the top two things, because while you're also dealing with security debt, you also want to make sure you're not accumulating more debt, right? Because just dealing with this is a big problem. I don't want to
You have to do something sustainable.
Yeah, you don't deal with this monster again and again. Imagine like going to a job and doing the same thing again and again every single day. That's burning out.
Well, if you work in a very large organization and research and development, you do that every day and again and again.
Sure, yeah. And so maybe startups is where innovation happens. And you should think about career change if you're getting bored or just complacent with it. Yeah, so that's what I think would be like the right way to deal with security debt in general. I have never heard of people just, like trashing everything and then starting from scratch unless there's like nothing in place, right? There are usually things in place. Like usually you are aware about a few things like MFA should be there.
Secrets.
All of this, like a lot of times before the first security person is got in, there is some basic in place. So it's not like, I have to like scratch everything here and build something from scratch. So yeah, that's what I would say is like the current, the way to deal with security debt.
I think what you mentioned after you evaluate, the ideal state and define it is defining the budget. Well, in startups, the budget is usually very, very limited. For everything, you have to find scrappy ways to go over something and find the solutions. Like even with automation, like use, let's say, or use open source projects when you can. But sometimes you actually need to buy tools that cost money. How do you justify that budget internally? Let's say there was your first security engineer and you come in, let's say there are some basic things in place, but you think you really need let's say there was no SaaS, like you really need a SaaS, but and the open source maybe version does not cover all the, let's say, all the context of the company, and then you need something with the custom security test. So how do you justify that budget internally?
So how do you ask for budget to your leadership, right?
Yes.
If I go and say we have 6 vulnerabilities in this code base, that drives no value to the context. But if I find concrete ways to maybe leak sensitive data, if I can pen test my own application and show that, well, now if I can do it, I'm pretty sure there's someone out there who is also capable of doing it, right? Now, again, depends on the context of what you're trying to exploit there. If you're able to show that this is going to drive value in terms of money and like business risk, I think that is a metric that they are able to understand and then allocate budget accordingly, right? Cannot just be like, today I wake up and I realize we need WAF, and so then I go WAF shopping. It's not that. And also, like, before we come to the tools, I think there has to be like a bare bones security culture, as in what are the things that I can do before going and asking for money. For example, I can find ways to integrate threat modeling, or build different GitHub actions to carry out certain tasks. I can build certain kind of automation. A few hacky things that you can do. Once you have realized that, there's absolutely no place, no room for escaping, like tools, or boarding a new tool, that is when it will be more easier to have that conversation. Where you can explain why I need it, what is it going to solve, and here is how I think this approach will work out, this will play out. Another upsetting scenario I've seen is you get breached and then you realize.
Startups usually are not the target, luckily.
Of course, they're not that target. But like that is when you realize, oh, maybe we should have had that tool. Well, breach is an extreme situation, but say if you are getting a lot of like bug bounty reports. There are startups who don't even have bug bounty programs, but they still get reports, meaning there have been assets that are out there that are vulnerable and easily exploitable. Maybe that could be an indicator that, oh, there are certain gaps in my program and I have to like work on fixing. And if a tool is going to fix it, then it helps for making a case. Hey, in the last quarter, we got so many bug bounty requests, bug bounty reports, and this was the payout for all of these bugs. So if you want to avoid it, here is what we can do.
Okay.
Right? I think that's an easier conversation to have, rather than just waking up and being like, yeah, I want to go WAF shopping today.
It's a certain way of going shopping. Some people go for bags, some people for bags. Yeah, in a sense. But did you have any pushback ever on proposing new initiative, even though you had right arguments? How did you overcome it?
Okay, I'll use this one statement I learned early on in my career in different forms, but here's how I have understood the statement. Authority and security without a well thought out strategy is just organized chaos. What I mean by that is that, say, I'm having a hard conversation, but they want to just push this whole feature out and they feel like what I'm proposing is absolutely unnecessary. I'm reporting a problem, but what am I doing to make their lives simpler? Nothing, right? I'm just nitpicking a certain solution, finding flaws in it, but like, what am I doing to make their lives easier? So you need to have a thought out answer to why this is a problem and how it can be solved. Now, it can work out one of the two ways. Like, you don't want to go into a meeting and then just make it noisy and chaotic, like, oh, this is wrong with the application, that is wrong with an application. It's like, great, we understand it's wrong, but like, what do you want me to do? In my head, this seems very secure. So I don't know what you're talking about. So your approach here it could work out one of the two ways. One is you make them understand how vulnerable this is, reach a common, and they fix it themselves. Or two is, because you're in a startup, you take the onus. You go and fix it yourself. Who's happy? Everyone's happy. We're fixing the problem. We're also dealing with pushback. We're also coming to a good solution, a comfortable state. And who would not like that? You are making a concrete decision, right? But also you are helping and complementing a team by taking on some of their work. And so what that does, it also makes you think of security as a helping hand, as an enabler rather than a blocker. And I think that is a win in developing that culture.
Do you think is there a thing like too much ownership?
Okay, so now there's often confusion of who owns this. But what I like in most team cultures, or at least with a lot of startups, is ownership is a baked-in value. If you see something is wrong, you can go fix it, right? So I wouldn't say there's too much ownership, because if there's too much ownership, you would either, you would end up burnt out, which is not.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and you don't want to just, like I said, create chaos and then assign tasks to people. And then that's also to ownership, because you're not owning a lot, but they're owning a lot. And how is that helping anyone if it's only slowing down the process? We're not building a safe product at the end of the day. So yeah, that's how I think about it. Ownership is a good value I have learned in a lot of startup cultures.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can also not realize that you own something, but you actually are, but it takes takes time.
It's usually very clear cut. Even if you're building a new product from the scratch, it's very evident. If I'm talking about like securing a database, it has the word securing in it. So whose ownership is it? It's obviously security's ownership. And I think working closely with developers will help you make it like more of a joint ownership than just like one person working in silo and then making all of these changes. Right? More aligned to what their roadmap is, and you'll be more aligned to finding out how I can complement my roadmap to theirs so that there's maximum productivity.
I think like startups who have luxury of work actually very close with each team member and the security with developers then as well. So do you think it's a benefit, or sometimes because the relationship is potentially better, that you can neglect certain things or certain behaviors?
I think so. Wait, so when we say neglect, you should not neglect
You
lack
can
of.
close your eyes, you can close your eyes on some things.
Yeah. No, I think no matter what your relationship is, you should figure out what you can neglect and what you cannot neglect. For example, something you cannot neglect is lack of MFA on admin account. I like you cannot absolutely shut your eyes and be like, yeah, it's fine. It's okay. We have a great relationship. That's
Yeah.
gonna save the company. That's not gonna save the company. Let's be honest. So even if you're neglecting or putting things on a back burner, as long as you're making, you're taking care of the critical aspects of your product, I think you're in a safer place, like easily exploitable things. If you make care of that, then I guess neglect is not a conversation we're having because we are taking care of it, right? There's no sense of neglect in it, even if there's like a great relationship. In fact, there is a great relationship, and that is why we're solving problems.
Well, hopefully. At
Hopefully.
least that's if there is not a great relationship, I think in a small team, then it's a really big problem,
Yeah.
especially in the long run. Well, already in the short run for the company, and in the long run, even as the company grows, I think culture-wise, it's definitely
It's not
not
sustainable.
sustainable. No, not at all. And you mentioned as well, like sometimes you've seen that there were already some basic things in place, but I think like even with the AI, what we discussed in the beginning, those basic things, that basic controls that were going to be implemented, they're going to be constantly changing. And I think I came across one of your LinkedIn posts where you also mentioned, I think it's a comment on Daniel Missler's newsletter about like that API security is now important too. So, for example, I think you mentioned you overlook like critical, like a lot of people are still overlooking like rate limiting and least privilege access. Like, why do you think, actually, why firstly you mentioned that the API security, is actually important?
Yeah.
And why did you mention like those specific practices?
APIs are invisible until they're not. What I mean to say is that, say, your product is scaling fast. And so, because of that, you're going to have a bunch of untracked, not greatly documented APIs, right? APIs also have a higher exposure. And so that's one aspect. There's also third-party APIs that you're going to leverage where you don't have a lot of control and are solely dependent, hoping that the other third party is taking care of APIs. So I feel like APIs are being used in so many ways right now that the attack surface is just increasing. And that is why it feels like a very important industry to be in right now. There's also like lack of awareness. A lot of them might not probably know what Pola is or like how different API attacks work. I have had so many conversations where people are aware about the OWASP top 10 of web apps, but not so much about APIs. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, when someone starts building out an API, I think that's a very important resource to like put in the docs where like talk about OWASP APIs top 10. They might not be able to breeze through the whole document, but you as a security professional know what is highly relevant to the feature being built. So try to increase that awareness. There's also trade-off for speed. Partnership this API today, and it seems like really important. Well, the problem here is you did not involve security early on. Now you feel like we should, trade off for over security. There's also, I've seen operational challenges also more so as the teams start growing out. Say 700, 800 developers. The operational challenge more is like teams are now working in silos, and so
Yeah.
there's not a lot of conversation happening. There's no one standard PM who is looking at all these different teams and integrating together. So that's also an operational challenge. And I feel like all of these obstacles are real, but they're not insurmountable. You can still have a few workarounds for that, right? Like if you're trying to integrate a third-party API, make sure that they are better from a security perspective. Say if it's something to do with like financial transactions, am I confident that this third party is taking good care of their security, right? They have say no security documentation, then I'll be like a little like wary of, well, you are supporting financial transactions. How are you not able to provide, these documents? I think, and that's an extreme case that I'm saying, and that hardly ever happens. But yeah, so having them vetted. The other thing is baking in security early on, like making it easy for a threat model to be iterable across different teams. I think that would also help immensely, knowing, oh, well, this feature is coming out, and so I should be on it. I should, or as a developer, I should have a conversation with a security person.
Yeah,
Like,
of course.
API. And then the third one is the operational challenge, right? Like team working in silos. I think that's a very culture-driven change, and it's very gradual. It does not happen overnight. Um, it's more so, I like to think that it's more so top down than bottom up, where if you feel like your leadership is security aware, it's easier to have security conversations for an IC rather than.
It's definitely easier. It's definitely easier. But I think, for example, in the small organizations, sometimes the structure is quite flat. So in these cases, you don't, you have to be on your own responsible for thinking as well for that. And I think, as you mentioned, like third-party APIs, at least I think it's definitely big risk, especially in startups, for example, because a lot of teams, sometimes it's one-person team, are kind of using external tools and building their own things, like with the automation tools. And sometimes you don't even know. Like I know, at least for example, if I'm going to ask someone internally about APIs I have been using in my workloads, no one is going to respond to that. So, but I mean, I know for us, for example, we know and we list things that we're using, but in a lot of teams that's not going to be the case. So it's definitely, I think, in the future will be a very, very, sensitive topic for sure.
Yeah. And also, like, have you noticed, like, with like the advent of LLMs, a lot of people are using the APIs, right? And then there's sudden like uptick in like the API attacks related to LLMs, right? Where like you're trying to steal information, you're trying to like prompt inject and all of these things. I feel like now if we're going to heavily depend on AI, I think API security is still, you better pay attention to it now. Later on. Yeah.
Like it's definitely sometimes LLM security is getting more and more synonymous with an API. At least I've seen that at the conference in December, and there were a lot of talks about LLM and API security and how everything is basically connected together and the ways you need to pay attention to protect. Also when it comes to validation of security budgets, sometimes, the budgets are actually given or discussed with a lot of the board meetings. At least like I know in our case, like our CTO, our CEO go, and during board meetings, it's something they discuss with VCs and advisors. And this is actually the work cases where they influenced a lot the hiring process and the budget. So do you think they also kind of play a role in defining, timelines for application security, or like when do you hire application security engineer, when you should dedicate, secure any kind of security budget as well?
I think that's a great question, and also a question I don't often get asked. So there's a common, they say that VCs don't care about security. I think that's a very off statement. VCs do care about security if it's a business risk. It's a financial company, healthcare industry. You do care about security, right? They also care about something that's going to help them generate revenue. So that means customer. So customer demand is also related to how good a customer feels about your security, right? If they don't feel good about your security, then there are chances that your sale is going to get affected by it, right? Like, why would I want to do business with someone who does not care to store my data securely, right?
Yeah.
You would not, right?
Yeah.
And so they do. It is, again, a risk. It's a business risk, right? I also see that early stage VCs may deprioritize security because in the early stage, your focus is more on speed. Your focus is more on delivering MVP and testing your product market fit. Unless it's a security product, right? If it's
Yes, in this case, in my case, it's all about security.
If it's product dealing with security, you want to think about it. But if it's like a later stage company, I think they would more so rely on the founding team, the founder's approach to it. They would mostly assume that the founder is taking care of these responsibilities. The CTOs are having an attention towards this problem. And so I've also seen that in the last couple years that there is actually due diligence on security when you're trying to raise funding, right? Which I did not see much before, or did not even hear about before. Like, yeah. So there is due diligence even when they're trying to raise funding, that how secure is this person, is this company, right? And yeah, so there's like different conversations you would want to have around exit readiness also. Like, are we ready to exit? So if we're ready to exit, or if we're going to enter into a acquisition, is my
For sure.
product good enough to be shipped, right? Those are the conversations you have at the later stage. But those conversations are happening, right? Apart from that concern of like, maybe they don't care about security.
Yeah. And from what stage of funding do you think they really should care? Seed, Series A, Series B, or maybe depending on how big the team is?
I think context matters again.
Okay.
If, like we said, if it's security,
Healthcare or
yeah, if it's a security product, day one. If it's healthcare, again, day one. But if it's something that is not something that is storing a lot of sensitive information, or is just, maybe like gaming, for example, like there are obviously a lot, it depends on what you're building again in gaming again. But something that does not have a high impact, maybe you don't want to have that conversation right away because your priority is shipping MVP. Your priority is shipping that product and seeing if you are a product fit, right? So having that security conversation might not be relevant at that point. But here is what I would say. The onus is on the founders to communicate security as a need for investment, or a need to hire. And I think as a founder, I would hope that they would, the basic strategy. If you are venturing into uncharted territories, like signing contracts with healthcare, like pharmacies or whatever, where you are storing PHI, you have to be security aware and assign a dedicated head of security at that point. If your product is something to do with, like, something that doctors use, where they store, patient information, you should think about security. Have dedicated personnel for security the day you onboard, even like slightly before you onboard your first, your first partner, or I don't know, the first sale that you do. So yeah, so context matters is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Okay, it totally makes sense. Also seen that you've been quite a vocal, advocate for women in cybersecurity. Did you see that actually, for example, in the startups, it is the diversity in tech and in the cyber is important, or it's actually not really something that, let's say, startups pay attention to?
It very much depends on who the hiring manager is. I have come across some hiring managers who are hyper aware of, like, well, there's only like one set of people in this room and there's no other form of representation here, right? And so they will make attempts to train more employees within their team or within the org so that they're able to step up and get a seat at the table, right? But then there's also this aspect of bias. Not everybody's thinking about it all the time. Bias is something like gender bias. I see something day in, day out. The most basic naive example I can give is I was asking ChatGPT to build a picture of what it thinks my life looks like. And since I have most tech related conversations with ChatGPT, it built out a guy. And I said, like, didn't you know I was a female? So why did you make a picture of a guy? And then it corrected itself. So that's gender bias, right? And if an AI model is capable of doing this, so much possible that a human is going to do gender bias too. But on the bright side, it's getting better. I remember, like, from having conversations with some people, they were like, like when they started out in security, where security was not even a thing, there were hardly, people identifying from different groups. And so now it's gotten better, where there's like more women like you and I. We're having this conversation because those people are making it more inclusive. It's harder to make a seat at the table, but you can also just make your own table, right?
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
And so, yeah, and so that's a positive change. It's gradually happening. And I really hope that, we consider the, limitations of AI with respect to gender bias, because like that's going to impact our future generations coming too. I would really love to see more women and underrepresented piece become
Yeah.
part of security.
Yeah, I do hope that's going to be the case, at least we definitely see, at least I could see, because I visit a lot of profiles of security engineers, that it has been changing. At least I think in the conferences, it's definitely changing. For example, like BSides, they don't accept manuals anymore, which is a good thing, because then at least you definitely make more effort to actually make your panel diverse and make
Yeah.
voices diverse, and then it's a nice thing.
It's also like if I see someone who looks like me on a stage, it makes me think that I am capable of doing this tomorrow, right? It's like maybe that person and I have similar challenges,
Yeah.
right? If they could do it, and if I can see some kind of mentorship from that person, maybe I would be able to solve these challenges much easier. I would have otherwise, right?
Yeah.
And also, like, like my grandma used to always say this, like, your potential is endless. And
That's a good grammar.
you are
Yeah.
infinite. And yeah, that's something my parents taught me too. And so maybe that somewhere gave me this push to put myself out there. Give it. My father is obviously in tech, and so it's easier for me to be, because that was some dinner table conversations we used to have. Even till this day, when I have dinner table conversations with my family, my cousins, we're talking about startups and equities, and yeah, that's the kind of conversations we had. Like when I visit my family in Sunnyvale, that's what we talk about. Very much less about what movies are going on out there. Yeah, it's an unconventional family dinner conversation.
I mean,
Yeah.
it does happen. I think it just depends indeed on where your family is coming from. For
Yeah.
example, like my family, both of my parents are entrepreneurs, so yeah, usually we talk. Sometimes they ask questions that are more business, let's say, related, or share their stories. So it helps a lot to see what can be done as well from that perspective. I always ask like this question, towards the end of the podcast, if there would be one piece of advice that you would give for a young generation, how to navigate, unique challenges of security that's, in your case, related to a startup, what would you give them as advice?
So, okay, so to a lot of young people, I started out as an introvert. And one book that really helped me was this book called Quiet by Susan Cain. I even got to show it my
Oh,
first
nice.
whatever ago.
Yeah.
And so quiet helps you understand that as an introvert, you have a power of thinking, of a way that you can express your opinions without being stopped. Okay. And then the second thing I learned through my mentors is whatever point you're trying to make, try to show as much as impact as you can. The deeper the impact and more autonomy you have in whatever you're proposing, it's more likely that people will believe in your conviction, and will believe in your approach, your proposed idea. And something I always like to tell people, especially in tech, like, is this something you want to do longer term? Say you work maybe 8 hours a day. That's 1/3 of your day, which is one
Yeah.
third of life. Is this what you want to do in long term? And if the answer is a resounding no, you should start thinking about some other alternate life. Like, I don't think at the end, there's a very nice article called Premortem, where this person, it's a Wall Street article, I'll pass it on to you, where they count about the number of days they have in their life, and how at the end they would not want to think about the money they made, or like they would want to think about like friends, how happy they were, right? And like all of these problems that seem huge in your career today might not even be that huge 10 years down the line, right? So yeah. And also another thing I like asking people, that if not a career in tech, what would you do? You are very passionate and excited about that. Maybe you have an answer about what is an alternate career that you should pursue.
Did you ask that question yourself?
Yes, I have asked that question to myself, and I think time and again I found that I am always been excited about security and startups.
Okay. Wow. That's
Yeah, longer term, I think I know where this is headed. Like, I know the vision that I'm trying to head towards. And also, like, if I didn't have a career in tech, I mean, I would just do art, but I'm not a great artist. I am passionate about like curating art.
It's subjective. Art is very subjective.
Exactly. It's very subjective. What I find beautiful, you might not find beautiful. But like with tech, what I find is right. It's easier to make a case.
Okay. I mean, it's either working in production or it does not.
It doesn't. Exactly. It's very
Yeah.
binary. So
Yes.
yeah, that's something I always ask young people. Like whatever decision you're making, make sure you're gonna be happy with it and that you're not like escaping something. Like you
Mhm.
hear about like people dropping out from school, like because they want to escape school. But like what is your plan? Like is if this is gonna make you happy and you're not gonna regret it, go for it. But yeah, what is it that you're heading towards? It's gonna make you happy? Do it. Nothing else matters.
Yeah, sometimes it takes definitely time to figure out, especially when you're very young, what makes you specifically happy. And yeah, you need to try different things. Sometimes, yeah,
Yeah.
you find your path. But I really like that you came prepared with a book because usually that's the really last question asked, but you already gave the answer, so it's perfect. Thank you so much, Kalyani, on coming on the podcast and sharing your knowledge. And I'm sure it was very enjoyable conversation for me, especially because I personally can relate a lot to what you mentioned. So thank you so much, and it was a pleasure.
I'm glad. Thank you for having me.